All right. Oh, excuse me. All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the regularly scheduled City Council work session for Tuesday, December 16th, 2025. First thing on our agenda is the 37th Street Widening Project Overview and Phase 3 consideration. Before I turn it over to staff, I want to say I know there's probably not going to be some really great news in some of these slides in this presentation. If you notice any frustration from anybody on council, it's not directed at anybody at staff or anything. We know that the staff that's in place has been doing a wonderful job going through, correcting deficiencies, and working towards better solutions to make these products in the future comply with our codes, and also make sure that they're done correctly and in a safely manner. So please don't take any frustrations out as being personal. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you. So Ty Boreski, Public Works and Utilities Director. Today I'm going to be presenting on the 37th Street Widening Project, specifically the Phase 3 component. However, I'm going to go into some detail about previous phases because they all really they're pretty intertwined and they feed into where we are today. So first I'm going to talk about the kind of history and overview of the project, where it started, how it evolved, where it is today. Then we're going to move specifically into Phase 3, discuss the previous City Council presentation in 2023 about the design elements, move into kind of the project timeline, the finances, some recently uncovered deficiencies with where we're at, and then staff recommendations on how staff believes we should best move forward. So starting with the 37th Street project, as you are all aware, this is part of the Greater Freedom Parkway project, basically to widen 37th between Highway 85 out to the interstate. We have a component of it, of which we have made great progress in expanding the roadway. The goal is to serve as a reliever for the heavy traffic on US 34 and to support increased traffic from residential expansion in Evans. When this project initially went out for bid, it was initially identified as the 37th Street and 47th Avenue widening design project. So the goal was to widen 47th Avenue between 37th Street and city limits, and then widen 37th between 35th Avenue and 65th Avenue. I'll go into a little more detail on this in a moment, but in the initial contract went out in 2019. In 2021, the city went back to the design engineers to phase the project, basically to break it into more bite-sized pieces that the city could afford, kind of the phases that you know today and are familiar with, especially Phase 1, 2A, 2B, which great progress in recent years, and then kind of Phase 3, what we're going to be talking about tonight. So to discuss the engineering side of this, in February 2019, the original contract for the design of this project was awarded to Roxol. I think it's important to mention that they were awarded the contract despite being the second highest bidder, the low bid being around almost a little more than half of what the original awarded contract was. I included the specific language in the staff report, but basically the justification at the time was Roxol was the most responsive to all elements of the scope of work in the RFP, and staff at the time were confident in their ability to build the roadway to the CDOT specifications that they were hoping for. 2 years later, in May of 21, there was the first change order that I mentioned on a previous slide. That change order is attachment B in your packet. This was basically breaking down the project into the standalone projects that between 1, 2A, 2B, 3, and 4. And there was also some work beyond the original scope that was included, some things that staff missed or that the engineering design firm came across in their work, things that were going to cost a little more money than the original contract was building up to. And then a little over a year later, in 22, there's change order number 2, which is attachment C in the staff packet. And basically the gist of that was the phase 3 component of the project. So to take the 37th Street component, extend it through 65th Avenue, and look at the 65th Avenue and 37th Street intersection. And so in total, we went from a $1.493 million contract to a $2.384 million contract with the addition of those 2 change orders. So discussing the current state of the contract, so there is approximately a little less than 7% of the project budget remaining. So $2.2 million out of the $2.384 million has been invoiced and spent by Roxol. Cody specifically asked me to look into how much of that was remaining in contract value for the phase 3 work as part of that second change order, and how much was left in overall project contingency. So we have just over $40,000 in contract value left as presented in change order 2, and then just over $117,000 in project contingency remaining. And the state of the project, I kind of listed here as 90% design of phase 3 intersection complete, but it is missing some key elements. And I'm going to go into those elements that our engineering team, which has undergone new staff members change, has come across and has been hoping to work with city council and city leadership to address. So here's where we start moving into specifically the phase 3 component. And I have this kind of overview map up here because there's a few elements I'm going to mention. The main being what's listed in Google as the Western International Music School on the southwest corner of the intersection. That's kind of a theme as we have, as I start diving into this conversation about what has been shared with council and what has changed since. And then we'll also be talking a little bit about those driveway access points that you see to the north of the intersection. Sorry. And you also may ask, this project, I talked about a change order in 22. Well, how has this progressed? Where have the problems been uncovered, and how are we working to address them? So in 22, we had the change order soon after Roxol started the work. A lot of work happening behind the scenes. And then in February 23, engineering staff at the time specifically came in front of city council in a work session with the goal of presenting two alternatives, a signalized intersection or a roundabout. And I've included that as attachment D and E in the staff report. That predates me, so I wasn't part of it. It's been a lot of picking up the artifacts of some of this, but I wanted to have a full understanding of what came in front of council already and how have things changed since then. As we moved into 24, we had CDOT approve the right-of-way plan in June. A few months later, we started looking at right-of-way service surveying, negotiations with property owners. Those 2 driveway access points I mentioned, that doesn't seem to have been identified as a problem until this moment. So as we discussed that, there's specific right-of-way that the city would have to acquire in order to expand the intersection based on the proposed design. And so there's a challenge to do that within what the city owns. We would have to go out and purchase land from 2 landowners, one of who property is in the county, and there's been some challenges with those. Those were completely unforeseen, not anticipated by engineering in 22 when this started, but have posed a significant challenge. And Cody and I have talked about that since I started, that we needed to figure out the right-of-way if we wanted this project to move forward. So over that period, we worked with Roxol to develop exhibits for right-of-way acquisition, went back to the landowners multiple times. We had, in November of that year, started exploring U-turn exhibits to address driveway accesses. Basically, the concern at the time was, could those property owners have both-way directional access out of their driveways? That was the ask. The city, wants to work through the right-of-way acquisition process to work with them. So we started looking at different ways that we could consider their demands and get what the city needs, which is expanded right-of-way. As we pushed into 25, we started looking at alternatives there, including potentially modifying the median design associated with the Roxall provided signalized intersection, which then brought us kind of into the second half of this year that basically signaled that, because we now had additional right-of-way from this negotiations, we would need to resubmit our plans. Specifically, I'm going to skip one ahead, specifically that property on the bottom left, the schoolhouse, we basically we received word that the intersection alignment would be too close to the roadway, and the only way the city could move forward was to purchase the parcel as a whole. As we push to the summer and tail end of the summer, we continued to explore median alternatives that could meet the needs of the driveway access folks. Internally, we started having conversations about whether there was going to be a collaborative approach to this and what that could look like. We had one last kind of Hail Mary where we tried to bring CDOT in to discuss some of their access concerns associated with the median. And while they were comfortable with some of these modified median designs, the project engineer responsible for the design, we weren't able to come to a amicable solution they were willing to stamp. And when it comes to engineering projects in the city, we do not want to move forward with unstamped, unapproved designs because that takes the liability out of the trained professional engineers and puts them elsewhere, which is not a risk that we are willing to take. In September, Roxall reached their kind of 90% design threshold, and as we're having conversations about this lack of an accommodating median, we started looking at the footprint of the project. Our focus had been at the time to purchase the right-of-way, move it as fast as possible so we could make best use of the grant money the city has been awarded for this project. Once we started kind of hitting a brick wall, we started looking at all of the baseline project assumptions. And that's when we started uncovering some of the issues related to growth rate and consistency. We had a refined engineering estimate of the project done, which showed numbers much higher than was presented to City Council shortly after we briefed Cody on what we uncovered, and that's how we're here in front of you today. I think there's definitely some information that was provided to City Council in 2023 that no longer applies, and the next few slides I think we'll get at a few of those and hopefully help us push through a direction moving forward. So on February 21st, 2023, we had a work session with City Council. Specifically, this exhibit was proposed looking at a signalized intersection versus a roundabout. That schoolhouse property on the southwest was a major point of emphasis for city staff at the time. They said if we were to look at the signalized traffic intersection, we would not need to purchase that whole property. We would have massive right-of-way acquisition savings. Therefore, as I'll get to in the next slide, that was the main kind of justification for moving forward with the signalized intersection was we would not have to purchase that property. There's a second component of that based on growth rates that kind of pushed out data showing that the roundabout would potentially reach a undesirable level of service in 2045 based on the growth projections used that I'll get into in a little bit. So I'm going to just go over a few of the kind of main take-homes from that work session. So the cost provided, I think this is something to really take note of. So we kind of showed and we, the engineering staff at the time, showed a cost estimate between 5.1 and 5.8 million and right-of-way acquisition of 2.8 acres. For the roundabout, we said it's going to be a little more expensive, $5.3 to $7.1 million, mainly because there'd be a higher right-of-way acquisition component. As of 2025, we now know that for both of these, the schoolhouse purchase is going to be required, and therefore, the cost breakdown is incredibly similar and is no longer a driving differentiator on how we move forward. And I share this because I I think it provides insight into how the engineering department was sharing information with City Council at the time. This is a slide you would never see come from me, because I would look at something and say, level of service fails in long term and better in long term. And I would really struggle to bring that in front of a group that has a really difficult decision to make. I think, looking back at this, it's quite a few of the assumptions that were presented here. I think quite a few of what is provided for City Council to select one item or another was provided in a way that the answer was basically already made up going into the conversation. It kind of comes off as an argument that was made for the sake of giving an alternative without providing an opportunity to actually consider two valid options. And so what that ended up spitting out was City Council was comfortable moving forward with the staff recommendation for a signalized intersection based on what was provided, which is the logical decision when you see a more expensive option that you're told is going to fail by 2045. But the job of our engineering team is to kind of take a step back here and look at how we feel about those assumptions, how we feel about the costs that were provided. And this next slide is going to be a bit shocking, but our engineering team did a great job looking back and trying to figure out what is an accurate cost estimate for this project. And what was originally billed as between a $5 and $7 million project for a signalized versus roundabout is today right around $14 million. And one of the major discrepancies associated with this is the approach taken by the engineering firm originally was really put together in a kind of a piecemeal way, using kind of percentages of previous projects instead of looking at line item materials, line item designs for the specific design provided. And so we have this kind of $14 million project budget for phase 3 as designed, signalized intersection. We have $7.4 million budgeted, which includes $1.5 million in grant funding. And I will mention that your packet did mention $5.6 million. I worked with Jackie to make sure we had the right number. We had to roll over some of the funding we originally earmarked for 25. So it is $7.4 million available in budget, still very short of the 14.2. And so this is quite a ways higher than the 5.1 to 5.8 shared with City Council 2 years ago, and higher than the $4.4 million estimated as part of the Surface Transportation Block Grant application, which is the application we use to obtain the $1.5 million in grant funding. And so this pushed us into, okay, we've identified some deficiencies with cost. There's definitely some discrepancies of what was shared 2 years ago. There were definitely some issues with the estimating, and that pushed our engineering team to start having conversations about other baseline assumptions that were presented to City Council as fact. And the first was looking at the growth rate. And we have had lots of conversations about the growth rate in relation to water, wastewater, transportation. It's something we always need to keep on the forefront. It's something that it's a real challenge to get right. But if you end up too conservative in terms of trying to overplan for things, you end up with $14 million plus projects you can't afford. And so as part of the city's grant application, what we shared was that we're anticipating between 1.7 and 2.1% growth between 2015 and 2040. And so that differs between the growth assumptions used as part of the design of this intersection, which was a 3.9% growth rate. And so that's a combination of the 2.8% traffic growth on 37th and 5% traffic growth estimate on 65th Avenue. And I had to do some deep dives into figuring out where these numbers came from. And so engineering and I worked through emails back and forth on how we came to this point as a city. And so my research suggests that it was a combination of the North Front Range MPO's modeling with adjustments for expected developments associated with Tuscany and Peakview were the two mentioned there. And in a way, looking back at that, the North Front Range MPO is also considering land use in their projections. So there's an argument to be made that we potentially double dipped on some of that. In the email correspondence we uncovered, staff specifically requested a more aggressive growth approach versus something more conservative or moderate. There was some correspondence on whether we should be using 5% on 65th or 3%. Ultimately, the decision was made to use 5% on 65th and then average it down with the 37th Street traffic growth expectations. And one thing I kind of also wanted to signal here, I reached out to Alex yesterday as we were uncovering some of this on, what have some of the other development plans we've seen, what has it shown for this intersection? And so Peakview submitted some development planning studies around the same time frame with differing turn lane configurations than what Roxall ultimately ended up with. And then we looked back at the initial 37th Street widening assessment work, and while pretty rudimentary and basic, it showed yet another set of potential alternatives, although it's interesting because the traffic counts from 2019 were also used through 2022. So there's some, I wish I could share concrete information on specifically how the growth numbers were obtained and how engineering staff at the time, really dialed this in. But to me, and what I've uncovered, it seems like it was a black box, and it's kind of pushed us to this $14 million project. And I think current staff would say we lack confidence in this data and what it's led us to. And I just wanted to provide this slide. So this is from the North Front Range MPO 2050 Regional Transportation Plan. And you can kind of see that 3.8% annual average growth. You can kind of see the population growth and job growth associated with our growth management area. And there are some similarities here to what the overall average used was. However, if you look at our average annual growth rate between 1980 and 2020, we've seen some pretty dramatic differences from 2020 onward. And assuming we'll continue to grow like we did from 1980 to 2020 seems a bit far-fetched, and seems like we were maybe a bit aggressive on some of the growth data used to perform this modeling. And so all of this pushes us to, kind of these main concerns and is the city confident in the 2045, 2050 approach to growth projections? Because that's what we're talking about here. This design is a 2045 design year intersection. Can we justify a $14.2 million intersection knowing the state of our street CIP backlog that we've had conversations about? And we also have to recognize that the landscape that I've shared in this map has changed since we started having a lot of these conversations. This intersection went from serving what we thought was going to be part of Evans into serving Greeley to the north and a huge chunk of Milliken to the south. Can we justify a $14.2 million intersection to meet 2045 expectations, knowing that Milliken is really going to be the one who provides the additional demand, and we don't really have much insight into how that's going to happen. So I also add this note at the bottom because it was kind of left as just a kind of a side conversation, and it's in the existing traffic study. It said if we would have used a 3% annual growth rate, we would be able to meet all of our peak demands in 2045 with a roundabout. And I think that's counter to what was presented to City Council, where we said, oh, it's going to fail in 2045. It only fails because the number 3.9% growth was used. And if we don't have confidence into that 3.9%, how can we expect City Council to make an informed, educated decision on what alignment made sense? And that's kind of just that's engineering deficiency one. I've kind of listed three here. The second being the current 90% design alignment has right-of-way acquisition concerns. As I've mentioned, we've tried to reach an amicable outcome working with the landowners. That is something that doesn't seem to be possible. It's not something we should plan around. And the main consequence of this is that puts our $1.5 million grant from the North Front Range MPO at risk. And so we have decisions to make because $1.5 million, given our road taxes between 4 and 4.5 every year, it is a big chunk of change that really will help to help us decide how to move forward on this. And number three, I think, $14.2 million is almost double our project budget. And so if we want to move forward with the largest, most complex, most expensive intersection in Evans at 65th and 37th, there's going to be compromises that we make as part of our street CIP. And I also just want to add that when we look back at the phase one roundabout, which was just a few years ago, we're talking about construction alone that's $6 million more than that. And so it would be a huge challenge to fit into our budget as is. And I think I appreciate the opportunity to come in front of council and discuss, that this is not in staff's recommendation the best decision for the city at this point. So that pushes us into staff recommendations. The first being the city should consider ceasing all work related to 37th Street widening and phase 3 with Roxall. Outside of how the procurement process and change order process happened, current engineering staff and myself have not been impressed with some of the professional responsibilities that seem to have been potentially put aside at the behest of potentially city staff at the time. But when we look at work like this, we don't have traffic design engineers in-house. We look at consultants to help us really make informed decisions, to help us push assumptions. And knowing, the city, that's an expectation we should have. We should have a level of professionalism. We should have solid data behind decisions. We don't feel like we've been provided that quality. We are at a point where our project budget is basically exhausted, and we have huge elements of the project remaining. And so, the options that kind of come before you are, it's going to be a contract amendment to continue additional work with Roxall, because I don't believe there's any chance that we could redesign this intersection in the existing project budget, or, as bullet point 2 alludes to, should we consider the redesign of 37th Street Phase 3, taking another peek back at the utility engineering, traffic count, growth assessments, understanding the right-of-way concerns that we now know about, understanding what the city of Evans can afford, and trying to make a compromise solution to an intersection that fits what Evans needs now, that doesn't have lanes sitting for decades between 2045. What is the logical approach of when we need it, how we can do it within our existing budget and still meet what the city needs and expects out of the 37th and 65th intersection. And Cody and I had quite a few conversations about this, because we do have project budget available. We are talking about needing to take on redundant design work. How would we fund that? And so what we recommend would be to take the balance of the existing Roxall contract, combine that with some of the additional 1% street sales tax funding to kick off this work, this redesign work immediately. I want to add that this would not impact our ability to fund 49th Street widening engineering design or street lighting on phase 2A and 2B of 37th. I know those are high priority for the city council. The numbers do fit that we could do this work. We can roll that balance in and still be able to perform these high important projects. And on the grant side of things, I just want to add that in order to maintain grant funding, construction of phase 3 would need to be awarded no later than Q4 of 27. And that would push a date that we would have to have the design work awarded no later than Q2 of 26. So that would give us an adequate time to redo the traffic counts, utility engineering, come up with a modified intersection approach, and then move to construction, still be able to take advantage of the grant money we've been awarded. If right-of-way issues still exist with the new design, so this is basically referring to, do we have an opportunity to re-engage the roundabout discussion? I would say that if we need to purchase right-of-way outside of the schoolhouse, we would not be able to do that while still being able to take advantage of the grant money. The timeline, based on conversations we've had with the driveway access points, I don't think that's something that will be a short-term project. We're probably looking at adding 2+ years to the timeline as we work through the process of trying to acquire that right of way via other means. What this means is, when we push this design work forward, what we'd be looking at most likely is a modified approach to the intersection, much smaller footprint, potentially touching a lot less of the north and southbound lanes, but continuing the focus on widening of 37 through the intersection with adequate turn lanes to prevent backups in that area. And so I know there was a lot to that. I know some of it was redundant, some of it's new, some of it counters what City Council may have been told in the past, but Cody and I are here to take questions.
You should request to speak, because I know that's what we, Councilmember Delaney.
Yeah, just one question. If we were to decide to cease working with Roxall, is there contractual problems with that? Like, do we have a contract with them that says that we have to give them that work?
We do have an existing contract. However, I think we would have the option to opt out with 30 days notice. I'd have to look back at the specific contract, but it should be pretty easy. We, as an engineering team, have basically stopped new scope work for them in the last 2 months, knowing that we were going to have this conversation. So we are at a pretty logical cutoff point and don't expect much in the way of additional invoices with the remaining balance that's been shared. There would probably be a little bit of closeout costs, but it'd be minimal.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
My question is any of the work that they've done already able to be used if we move forward with someone else? Is it even accurate in any way, shape, or form? So would we be able to use anything of what they did to help in the future?
How we would go about that is when we put together our competitive solicitation, we would include that as an exhibit, giving the firms bidding on it an opportunity to incorporate that into their bid pricing. And they may be able to use elements, right-of-way exhibits. I think there are some things that would be usable. However, I would imagine the bulk, an engineering firm would be unwilling to take on the risk of reusing the bulk of that work. So I wouldn't anticipate a whole lot.
Thank you.
Very rarely will an engineer seal another engineer's design because they don't know the assumptions that have gone into it, the research and whatnot. So there would be some hesitation for an engineer to seal another engineer's work.
I understand. I was just, looking at it from the money point of view, and that's very frustrating to hear. So, but understandable.
So I have a question. Do we anticipate a design going forward if we continue with this project with another construction company where we will not have to possibly purchase the right of way from those other two landowners to make this project happen? My biggest concern is, I know we've talked as well, is the one individual will fight that tooth and nail, and we know that that would be potentially tied up in litigation for numerous years to ultimately wind up getting that piece of land if needed. Do we see a future where that may not have to happen and we can still move forward with that project?
Yeah, I think the best way to look at that is we would minimize our impacts on that leg of the intersection, knowing that at some point there will be some widening associated with that area. However, we could, that it would be a constraint that we provide to the engineering design firm up front. And we say this is a critical path to avoid this. However, we want to be able to respond to when we do eventually, take ownership of that right of way at whatever point that is, that we don't have an intersection that's no longer capable of doing that. So that's something we would bring back to the engineering firm, say, hey, we need to plan for this widening project at some point in the future. However, we need to minimize impacts outside of the right of way on this leg at this point. So we still may be able to touch it and do some improvements. We just would push them to really stay outside, and then we figure out whatever process we need to go down at some point in the future with those landowners.
So going to the numbers and the projections of the growth and everything, with the Cascadia project probably going on in Greeley and the increased traffic counts on Highway 34 and Highway 85 and 37th Street and Freedom Parkway going to be taking off some of those congestions and those problems, do you really think that a 1.7 to 2.1 is still accurate, and maybe it should be a little higher? Because I'm just trying to think of how those numbers got so high, as it was anticipating large growth in the Greeley area and on traffic counts on Highway 34, then moving over to 37th Street. I just, those numbers just are way a lot, almost double what we're seeing here now.
So I think the first part of that is the growth rate shared on top was more of the regional info shared as part of the grant application. Then we came back and looked at interstate or intersection specific data. So I do think that's a bit apples to oranges in the approach. What we may find is that these growth rates are accurate for some time in the future. However, for the 2045 design year, it seems pretty unlikely with the slowdown we've seen. As I mentioned, Peakview, Tuscany growth out there was considered. North Front Range MPO modeling was considered. That's now at a 2050 timeline. I'm not saying that this is necessarily wrong data. It's just it is a black box. We need to understand how that data was created, and we need a better understanding of this design date. Because I think there is a risk if we were to build this oversized intersection with no plans for 65th widening, we would have turn lanes that we just stick reflectors in and close out for potentially a decade. It's not included in our 5-year CIP at this point. So I think there's a lot to consider. I think our goal as an engineering group and as Sean New comes on board is to make sure that City Council has insight into these projections. And right now we don't have confidence in them. We also simply cannot afford to have that size of an intersection out there. And we also are struggling with the right-of-way acquisition side of things. So I think there's a whole lot of challenges coming together at once, and we need to have a compromise.
Councilmember Johnson?
Answer part of my question with what you just mentioned. I do appreciate coming back and getting it redesigned, because I think with anything, especially if we don't feel comfortable with what the numbers that we have, definitely let's do this, get it right. And it's specifically for that intersection, it's not as busy as 35th. I mean, and we can see it because we drive, our community. And so truly designing something that works for our community now, with some of the growth that's happening works best versus really looking at creating something that's working until like 2045. That just doesn't make sense at the moment. But again, and then the numbers as well, looking at the numbers and the rates and the growth, yes, you're looking at it from a regional standpoint, but really looking at it from, like you said, what are intersections, what those counts are, what that looks like, and seeing how much traffic they have now, and then maybe plugging in the growth percentages and seeing what that looks like 5 to 10 years is better than really forecasting way far. So anyway, with that said, I am for the staff recommendations. I think that these make sense to me at this moment, and definitely ensuring that we're being cost effective and really utilizing the monies that we have well.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of look at it as, yes, we do have some rework out there, but when we're talking about potentially spending millions more for an intersection, for more intersection than we need, there's cost savings that we may find that exist there. $14 million, that's 3+ years of road tax. It's when you put it in that context, it's really hard to think that we're taking 3 years of our taxes and right there, there'd be bonding and we could explore different ways, but frankly, our income is what it is, and we need to be very, very thoughtful on how we spend our dollars.
Well, and I just kind of, as looking at this design that we have, I'm also in favor of rethinking it because, to put into perspective, the busiest intersection in Greeley is 47th Avenue and Highway 34, and all but the northbound lane is what that intersection is. I mean, that's insane. So I appreciate the information you've brought us. It's obviously not good news, but I would strongly recommend that we do the right thing, put this on hold, and yeah.
Councilmember Neal, I know you're having some issue with your tablet. Do you have anything you want to speak to?
I don't have a direct question. I do have some comments later on.
You go ahead.
Okay. Well, this intersection, when the school came in, was apparently put in by the school district without much or very little input from the city. I spoke with Mayor Altsegler about it, and he just said that the school district was doing it. So apparently the city either didn't want to participate or didn't offer any input into the design of this originally. And these growth rates with the 900 potential homes coming in from Milliken, and who knows what's going to happen with Peakview. I sure don't anymore. If you go out and sit out there and just look at the traffic going through there during rush hour and school, it's like we've got to do something. It should have been designed when the school was put in my opinion, as a 4 lanes and with some turn lanes for buses and everything else. The problems with the property owners. I mean, if we can't get them to give us right-of-way accusations right away, if we did go ahead with any of this, I would suggest we just put 1 lane on the west side of 65th past 37th and put in our planned improvements on the east side if we can acquire the right-of-way and go from there. And if that involves upsetting a landowner because we've blocked off his entrance, I would remind the council that this is exactly what the city of Greeley did with Grapevine Hollow. They put in a median and blocked off people's access to a left turn at the north end of their development. So it's not uncommon for these things to happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Neal. Councilmember Johnson.
It's just comments also. I just wanted to add that kind of going back to granted the percentage may have changed now, but it's like I believe it's 94% of our community travels out of our city. And I think the most utilized roads exiting out, and obviously the 85 and 34, but are 35th and 47th for the most part. And some do use 65th, but anyway, I just wanted to add that also to the conversation.
Thank you. I just want to say that I really appreciate you bringing this back to the council and taking a second look at it. I really appreciate all the due diligence that you all do as staff and reviewing these past projects to make sure they make sense. Are they staying, on scope, on budget? Are we finding any deficiencies with any of these contractors and everything? So we really appreciate that. We really appreciate the dedication to that. It really makes us, or at least myself, believe that you guys are making sure that you're being wise with spending the tax dollars and making sure projects don't happen that don't need to be happening, or especially at a scope of that magnitude that was originally presented to us. So I really want to thank you for that. But I do agree with everything that was said here, that I agree on putting it on pause, maybe stop working with Roxall and taking another fresh look at it and going forward and seeing another design for the future. So I do appreciate you guys. I really do. And I don't see any other questions or comments, so turn it back.
So just to bring closure to that, if I'm hearing everybody correctly, that yes, there is agreement from the council that we will move forward with preparing to get this out, to redesign it, to bring our contract with Roxall to a close based on the contractual terms that we have in front of us. Prepare a scope of work, get that out there, bring back a contract in the next couple of months for city council's consideration. Is that, am I right on that?
That's what I was saying. Yes, so I agree.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. Is that all you have? Oh, okay. Well, all right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's 5:45, and guess we'll take an hour and 15-minute break. So thank you. Appreciate it.